Hi everyone, I'm Carl and this is a small build I put together to take a rest from a longer project I have been working on. Mike from Net1 Videos recently made a really cool model of some standing stones in his area, and I've been thinking of making a model of some standing stones around here for some time. They're pretty complex structures though, so that wouldn't really be a quick build. Later that week, some friends and I were discussing a mutual friend's science fiction build, and one of them mentioned that some of the bits looked like a wall of speakers. That reminded me of the screaming wall in the classic game Brütal Legend. If you like heavy metal, you should check that out. Great game with voice acting by Jack Black, Ozzy Osbourne and Lemmy Kilmister among others. This is not a sponsored video, I just really like that game. One of the locations in that game is the Bladehenge, which is kind of a circle of giant stone swords. Neurons collided, my train of thought derailed, and I thought it would be a great idea to build one of them. Lucky for me, it turns out that they're dead easy to make. Let's get on with the build. I started with a bunch of XPS foam offcuts, using the chunkier ones to form the blade. Starting with a rectangular piece and scoring down the middle of each side will give you a diamond-shaped cross-section. If you work slowly, it's easy to cut this down, and because we're going for stone ruins, you don't need to be too neat. It is a lot easier if you can keep both sides you're cutting in view as you work. I can't always do this because of the camera, but off camera it's really not a problem. After cutting the edges, I also cut down two of the corners to create a hexagonal cross-section. It's not necessary, it just depends on the kind of blade you want to make. Depending on how you want your blade to stick out of the ground, now would also be a good time to cut an angle into the bottom of the piece. Once you have your general blade shape, you can use a pencil to draw in runes, cracks or any other decorations that you like. You can also tear or cut more bits off. I didn't do this on this particular one, but I did do it on the finished piece. After that, I textured the foam with a foil ball and reinforced the pencil work. Onto the guard. For this, just take a flat piece of foam that's slightly longer and wider than the top of your blade, and cut it into a lozenge shape or a rectangle with rounded corners. You can go for a more realistic shape with quillins, but bear in mind that this will be rather fragile. I just went with a simple shape here. I also cut into the edges to make it look more worn. Again, I bashed the piece with a ball of foil to texture it. Go a bit easier here, as the thin foam will easily bend into a curve. To glue the pieces together, I used PVA glue and used a piece of barbecue stick to pin them together. The stick will also be used to pin the rest of the handle here, so make sure it sticks up a bit over the top of the guard. Next up is the tang. That's the piece of the sword that forms the core of the handle. You can't normally see this part as it's covered by the handle itself, but it's done this way in the swordy monument in Norway, which inspired the Bladehenge. And I think having the tang exposed makes it look more ancient and ruined. I used a piece that was roughly the same thickness as the guard, and cut it into a long trapezoid. Apart from the shape, this follows exactly the same process as the guard. You can make the pommel any shape you like. I decided to make this one a fairly simple casket shape, though for the final piece I just used two roughly circular stone shapes. Now, the pommel is very small for a sword of these proportions and would be nearly useless on a real sword. This is an intentional design choice. Since I'm only doing the tang, with the bulk of the handle missing, a full-sized pommel would look huge. More so because once you're playing with this on the tabletop, it would be closer to your eye level than the rest of the piece, making it look even larger. Reducing the size kind of balances this effect out. Finally, the larger the pommel is, the likelier it is to hit something accidentally. And since the whole piece is just a long thin piece of foam, I wanted to minimize the risk of damage. Once the pommel was shaped and textured, I glued it into the tang using another piece of barbecue stick, and then glued the whole thing to the guard. And that's one sword done. Of course, this piece won't stand up on its own, so it needs a base. I made one by gluing some foam to a DVD from an old magazine, and then carved it up. The idea here was to have a sword sitting in a fiery crater. And this is where I did a stupid. Since I wanted the bottom of the crater to be relatively smooth, I dumped a whole lot of PVA glue in it. This will give me the effect I want, but it will also take several days to cure. I will revisit this piece in the future to practice object source lighting, so drop me a comment if that's something you might like to see in the future. In the meantime though, I started to carve out another base into a small mound. No specific plan here, I just made sure to form a pot that miniatures can stand on, and the rest is just hack and slash. After shaping the mound and texturing it to the good old foil ball, I painted the horizontalish surfaces with PVA glue and dropped in a bunch of sand on it, along with some dirt and bits of stone and cork. The more textures you get on here, the better. I gave this time to set and blew off the excess. Once everything was completely dry, I sealed the piece up with a mixture of PVA glue and black paint. You can use Mod Podge instead of course, but I'd run out and I couldn't pick up any right now. This coat is a bit less durable than Mod Podge, but unless you're planning to hit people with it, you should be fine. I gave that time to set properly and sprayed the piece with anthracite grey and a very thin dusting of white. Then I started one of my favorite parts, painting rock. To begin with, I just started splashing on various brown washes. Just brown acrylic paints diluted with 99% alcohol. This is a great tip I picked off John Hosenfeld over on the Crazy Crafters livestream. It makes the washes runnier than water and dries a lot faster. Once this hot mess was dry, I painted over everything with Payne's Grey diluted in water. This time I used water because I wanted a little more control over the paint. The semi-transparent layer of blue-grey over the browns and base grey gives a lovely rock effect. The end result was a bit too dark because I had not used a lot of white spray. To fix this, I gave everything a very light dry brush with a mix of Payne's Grey and Ivory to bring out some of the highlights. After that, I also painted the ground texture brown, highlighted it and moved on to glue some vines I had made. Zane Morgan made a great tutorial on these a couple of weeks ago, so I'm just going to link it in the description instead of going over it again. I went a bit heavy with the wash, so they're a bit dark, but I think they still add a lot to the overall appearance of the piece. Gluing the vines on was tricky. I used tacky glue instead of PVA as this seemed to set out faster, but these things were rebellious. This got me thinking of what a great introductory encounter this would be for a D&D game, to show new players the ropes. You've got this massive larger-than-life monument to make it clear that we're not in Kansas anymore, Toto, and a plant monster that is handy as it has a limited reach and can't chase after the players if they decide to retreat. Getting to the roots all the way at the top is going to be a challenge too. Other than that, I can't honestly think of a way to use this in a game. It might be usable in Stormbringer, maybe a monument to Ariok of the Seven Darks, Knight of Swords, Lord of Chaos, Duke of Hell, Patron of the Royal House of Melnibone, yada yada yada. But I don't really see it fitting in, say, the Empire in Warhammer. That's too similar to real-world Renaissance Germany for something this metal to make sense. But sometimes it's good to build something just for the quack of it, because you can, because it looks badass. Still, if you have any ideas, I'd love to hear them. Once I had finally glued the vines into submission, I started to add on some flock. Just laid down some diluted PVA, piled on some of my homemade flock and left it to set. Then I knocked off the excess, soaked it with 99% alcohol and sealed it in place with more dilute PVA. After that I just added some grass tufts, and that was that. What I really like about this build is how fast and easy it was to build the basic shape. If you wanted to, you could easily build a few in an afternoon and make them in all shapes and sizes. I'm looking forward to painting up the one I bodged, and I have also been challenged to make one with LEDs inside it, so that should be fun, I guess? For now though, that's a wrap. Thank you for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it and that you got something useful out of it. I'll be back in a while with more content, but in the meantime, have fun, stay safe and have a great time.